So, all right. Thank you everybody for joining tonight. For those of you who I have not had the chance to meet before, my name is Josh Mayleaf. I am the president of L&D Philly, and thank you for joining us for our January workshop here. Going to make some brief announcements, and we'll get to the main event here. One off the bat here, I want to take a moment to thank Vicky, Vicky McDevitt, who is going to be our producer for this evening and help me out with stuff, make sure that things keep moving along. And thank you as always for your help tonight. As you can see on your screen at the moment, you should be looking at our webpage. Since you all registered to get here, every one of you have been on our webpage at some point, so congratulations. You should also be getting our weekly emails with some updates as to what's going on. Want to take a couple of minutes though, just to, and you're seeing some of it flash by on the screen, but to give you a little bit of a sneak preview of what we have coming up. So coming up event wise, and they've, like I said, they've been coming by on here. By the way, the other reason that we use our website for this is because it's a great way to point out that you can find all of this wonderful stuff by coming back to our website at any point in time, ldphilly.com. So coming up for us on this left-hand side here with the L&D Philly events. So we're here tonight for the now and next of learning and technology. On Monday night for our members, and that this is one of the few member-only events that we run. But quarterly, we have a members only meetup. One of the hosts for that I see on here at least is Liz Nover. You want to say hi, Liz?
Hey, everybody. Hope you'll join us on Monday. It should be fun. We have great conversations.
That was succinct, Liz. Very nice. Yeah, so good opportunity. Unfortunately, one of those things that happened in the pandemic is I don't get to see and talk to people individually as much anymore, and we're working back towards some in-person events coming up here. I was going to say once the snow melts, but we haven't had any snow yet. So once there's less of a threat of snow, but in the meantime, it's a good opportunity for members to come together. Liz has some discussion topics. It'll be an opportunity to meet and talk to people. Some of the people on the call I know have been on them before, and hope you can join us on Monday night. Coming up after that, other workshops we got. So beginning of February 9th specifically, I said I know our demographics, so this is an interesting one. What TikTok can teach us about learning and development? If you're not one of the TikTokers, you're not doing the dances, if you're the Chinese, whatever the case may be, it is about TikTok, but it's also about using short videos and how you can use them effectively. Vanessa Alzate is our host for that. And if you follow her on LinkedIn, you'll see she posts a whole bunch of short videos that show kind of what she's going to be talking about. So that should be an interesting session. We have also coming up at the end of February with Cindy Huggett in partnership with our friends at Meet the Author. Cindy had a new book that just got released the end of December, and it's about hybrid training. And we've been through virtual, hybrid, now like what's the latest on that? So opportunity to hear from the author on that one. And then March we've got Unlock What's Next by Amplifying What Exists, and we'll have a musical theme with Rick Lozano, if any of you have seen him speak, another wonderful presenter. And the one that is, if it's posted, it's past this, but in April, we're doing another thing on video with Matt Pierce, who is with TechSmith, and so has some good tips on videos and learning as well. That'd be more probably long form as opposed to our short form TikTok. All right. Also, always on the website, you will see partner events. So we go to our partners' websites, find what's going on, and try to share that with you to give you a one-stop shop to find out what's going on. So you can find all kinds of information there. Other stuff on the website, just to point out, haven't had any posts lately. However, if you are hiring and want to post on the job board, members can always post jobs on here for free. If you are joining us as a guest tonight, you can always send it into the info@ldphilly.com email address, and we'll post it up for you. And then anybody can view the job board at any time. Going down here, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. I don't think I saw anybody from Judge on, but if you are here and want to say something, speak now. All right, my turn. So Judge Learning is our website sponsor. You will see them literally on every page on our website. They have a couple of main things that they do. One of them is custom content development. So if you're looking to get some stuff developed and outsource and want to outsource it, you can talk to them about that. The other thing they do is job placement. So back to the job theme piece of it. If you are looking for work, they can potentially place you somewhere. And if you are hiring and need assistance finding the right people, you can contact them as well. Again, their logo is literally on every page on our website. You just have to go to it and click. And then our other sponsor is Degreed. You will find them as our weekly email sponsor. So you'll get their, you see their logo in each of our weekly emails, along with a link to whatever report they are sharing presently. And I think the one now has to do with ROI and training, but Degreed is a learning experience or it's an LXP, learning experience platform. I think I got that right. This is what happens when it gets to the end of the night. And I see all the people nodding along. Thank you for the reassurance. And so it's a good way. They have the opportunity that you can curate learning paths for people using content from a variety of sources. And they've got some exclusive things like with, or if not exclusive, more limited with things like TED and other content. So check them out as well. Thank you to our sponsors. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the support of our sponsors. Including the fact that we have been able to make our programming quite affordable, at least I think so. If you are not a member and you paid to join the event tonight, thank you. If you would like to become a member, it's only $25 a year that gets you access to all of our virtual events, as well as the recordings of all the previous events and discounts off of in-person stuff when it happens. Again, stay tuned for all of that. Trying to think if I missed anything. Oh yeah, and you, for those of you who are members, you can always come here at any point in time, click on workshop recordings, and you'll be able to view them there. So I think that was about it. So let's get this party started. I'm really excited about tonight. Had the opportunity when I was at the ATD conference way back in May. God, it's been almost a year now. Walking around, got to talk to a lot of people, and one of them was David Kelly here. And so we talked a little bit, and I asked him if he would be interested in coming to present, and I had this topic potentially in mind. I'm glad this is where we landed. One thing I may have mentioned to you, and I don't know if you remember or not, that I think I saw you give a similar talk to this at the ATD Mid-New Jersey chapter at their big tech thing like 10 years ago.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so I imagine it's quite different than the presentation 10 years ago.
Wouldn't it be horrible if it wasn't?
Yeah, I'd be really disappointed because it was really good 10 years ago, but that same content probably doesn't hold up as well. So, but in any case, Dave comes to us as the currently the CEO of the Learning Guild. Some of you may remember it as the e-learning guild, but they've evolved. So there's more to it now, I guess. They put on a lot of great programming, and he may mention that as well. And we are going to be talking about what's going on out there in learning and development. It's interesting, before most of you joined, I was chatting briefly about, I suddenly every social media feed that I have that relates to L&D is all about AI and chatbots. And I had noticed that David posted something on LinkedIn recently, similar to something I did, that we both possibly either seen too much sci-fi or the right amount, but I'm starting to be convinced that, especially I saw one today, somebody used ChatGPT to program a storyline module. And so computers are programming computers right now, which I'm pretty sure was the beginning of the plot of The Matrix. So I have some fears. So hopefully you'll cover us with the learning technology that's not going to enslave us and that can empower us. And how's that for an intro?
That sounds perfect.
With that, I will stop sharing and hand it off to you, and looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see everybody here. Let me just share my screen. All right. Thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be with you here this evening. Just a couple of parameters before I jump in and get started. I embrace anarchy. So by all means, I'd like this to be as much of a conversation as you would like this to be. I like to, when I do virtual presentations, I like to kind of meet people where they are. So my understanding with this room is that everyone is by default on mute, but you have the opportunity to unmute at your own leisure. So while we will likely have time at the end for any sort of formal post-discussion Q&A that you might want to have, I invite you to just be part of the discussion. where if you have a comment you want to add to the discussion, you have a question at any given point, feel free to pose it into the discussion however you're comfortable. Unmute, put your camera on, just call it out. As was mentioned in the pre-thing, I'm from New York, so it's going to be very difficult for you to encounter it. Give me any sort of rudeness that I haven't encountered before. So I'm good with that. I recently did a presentation last year where one of the evaluations came back and said, I thought he'd be better looking. So it's very unlikely that you're going to do anything in this presentation that's going to be more insulting than that. And if so, I'm looking forward to that creativity. But I encourage you to either through chat, through video, through unmuting yourself, be a participant in the chat as you feel appropriate. And I look forward to being part of the discussion. So a little bit about me as we jump in. First off, as was mentioned, I am the CEO of the Learning Guild. We are a professional development organization like ATD, like some of the other ones that you see in the organization. We offer free membership. I'm not going to talk about all the benefits there, but it is a free membership that if you're not familiar with it, visit learningguild.com. As Josh mentioned during the intro, we offer a host of different types of content and resources as part of our free membership. It's a great resource, in my opinion, for your professional development, but that's for you to decide, not for me to tell you it's going to be good. So visit learningguild.com, check out what's there, and by all means, join our community if you feel it's appropriate. This QR code that's on the screen here, whether you're with us live or whether you're watching a recording, you scan that QR code, it will immediately connect us on LinkedIn. While I encourage those of you that are with us live to be an active part of this discussion here, some of you might be watching the recording and it's really difficult to ask a question of a recording. But I encourage you to reach out to me. I love having these conversations. Feel free to reach out to me. One of the best ways to do that is on LinkedIn. So if you scan this, you will immediately be connected with me on LinkedIn and be able to message me. A lot of people aren't familiar with this functionality of this aspect of the LinkedIn app. So if you're not familiar with how convenient this is, if you stay till the end of the presentation, or if you're watching this recording, if you just scroll to the end and cheat, I'll show you how to do this on your own. All right, so with all of that, let's jump into the nuts and bolts of this presentation. So I am often asked to come into to events to speak on the now and next of learning and technology. Josh mentioned 10 years ago, I did something similar in New Jersey. I am fortunate enough to be in a role that I'm a student of this field. I love this field. And now I am in a role with the Learning Guild where my job in many ways is to keep my finger on the pulse of the intersection of learning and technology. It's the passion of mine. And now it's actually in many ways a big part of the job that I do on a daily basis. So I'm privileged to be invited to events like this, to have this presentation, to share some perspectives on it. And when I do that, every single time I do it, it's different. Every single time I might start from the last time I did it, but then I kind of ask myself, what's different? What's changed? What's new? What's different? And while every single time I do it, there's always little variables of how I change it and how I might edit the presentation. A couple of years ago, it wasn't that easy. A couple of years ago, it wasn't that difficult to discover what was different. We had this little disruption in all of our lives that came around and kind of changed the game. And while we are fortunate, everybody knock on whatever wood is nearby, to be staring at some level of a post-pandemic world. And I hate buzzwords, but I'll use a couple of them that you've heard now. New normal, we're approaching whatever that new normal is. I do think that while the immediacy of the risks associated with COVID-19 seem to be a little bit in our rearview mirror, that we're learning to live with it rather than being such as a disruption to our lives. The tale of what we've all gone through over the last couple of years is going to be with us for quite some time, long after COVID is gone. And I think that is one of the major variables that we need to look at when we talk about this intersection of it. The biggest thing that we talk about right now is this idea of hybrid. Everybody's talking about hybrid right now and how we're going to be doing all of these hybrid events and what does it look like? And in the context of L&D, we discuss it in the context of hybrid learning. But sometimes I think we need to broaden our scope, broaden the view that we look at in terms of how we view our work, because the reality is we're not supporting hybrid learning. We're supporting the reality of hybrid work. And in every context of what that means. And I think part of the presentation that we're going to be talking about today, while the title of this presentation is around the now and next of learning and technology. And we will be discussing some specific technologies within that. You can't just discuss technology in isolation. So we'll be talking about some specific technologies, but we'll also be talking a lot about the environment in which those technologies exist and the environments in which we do our work, because those are also huge factors in terms of how successful we can be in using those technologies. I do like this presentation slide here. Take a moment to just acknowledge this, because while it's typical stock imagery, it's one of the most unintentionally honest images I've ever seen, simply because it's a Zoom room and 4 out of the 6 people that are in the Zoom meeting at this time are actively talking at the same time. And that's probably unintentionally one of the most accurate representations of where we are in this hybrid workforce right now, of trying to just get one person to talk in the Zoom room at the same time. So where are we at? Well, hybrid work. Well, what does this all mean? Hybrid, we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, but there's been other things that have, I mentioned this long tail, there's been other things that we've gone through over the last couple of years that are part of this. Workforce changes. What it means to be in the workforce is changing. You know, when a couple of years ago, I mentioned that this presentation evolves. I had a similar slide to this, but it talked about the heading of this was around the what was the phrase that was very popular at the time, was the workforce being changed. Forgive me, the previous heading for the slide is, but at one point I changed it to what the current vanity term is around quiet quitting. But the reality is now we're talking about just the workforce is changes, it's changing, what it means to be in a workforce, what people are looking for in their jobs, and the expectations they have about what it means to be working for an environment. It's all changing, and we have to be, how we support a workforce needs to be congruent with people's expectations and how the workforce is evolving. Another thing that's been very much part of our vernacular over the last couple of years is the growing conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. There's been a lot of, like COVID-19, this going to the forefront has been triggered by a lot of really tragic events. But the reality is it is a very important part of what we do in our work, and it's a growing cadence theme that needs to be present in everything that we do in our workforce. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we go forward. So when I talk about this idea of technology's role in learning and work, it's, yes, we're using it in the context of learning, but we have to look at it in the broader context of where we're doing it and how we're doing it. And this presentation and this discussion that we're going to have tonight kind of has a couple of different legs to it. The first one is literally the technology itself. We'll start with a conversation around some of the trends that are going on around technology and learning, what they mean to us and how they can influence the work that we do. Then we'll flip sides to the coin a little bit. Instead of talking about the technology, we'll talk about the environment that they're in, that the work that we do exists in, and some of the forces that exist within that environment that if we are not cognizant of them in terms of how we do our work, we can very easily do something that we think is going to be right and have it not be successful, not because we chose the wrong technology or our implementation plan was wrong, but because we didn't factor in other forces that influence the success factor within that. And then towards the end, I'll shift a little bit towards practicality, because there's going to be a lot that I'm going to throw at you that is, we got to be focused on this, we got to be focused on that, we got to be focused on that. And it could feel overwhelming to see all of the different factors that are influencing our ability to do our work. But there are also opportunities within that, and we'll focus a little bit on the opportunities. And then towards the very end of the presentation, I'll just kind of share a couple of specific practical tips of things that you can do to put this into your practice. I am not, just kind of disclaimer before I jump any further, I am not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I am not here. Anytime you have a presentation, you come to a presentation like this and someone says, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, without the context of understanding the world in which you live and the world in which you do work, it's kind of doing you a disservice. I am not, there is no right or wrong. There is a right or wrong for you based on your unique context. What might be a great solution for one person based on the environment that they're in could be a complete failure for another one based on the differences in their environment in which they're working. So I'm not here to tell you that these are right or wrong, but I do have a view on some broad strokes. And I'm going to give you my goal here is to give you some context around some of the trends so that you can make informed decisions as it relates to your own work. Anybody who wants to have a conversation about the specifics of their own environment, some of the challenges they're having, by all means, reach out to me. I'm happy to have those discussions. And there might be a few moments, and I will try to acknowledge them at the time, where David Kelly, CEO of the Guild, who does all of this work and can share that perspective, will need to step back and just kind of say, this is David Kelly as an individual having a soapbox moment, and I want to be different. That does not reflect the feelings or opinions of the Learning Guild as an organization. This is just me kind of saying this is my thing. And I try to point those out when they happen. So with that, let's jump in and get started. All right, let's talk about some technology trends. There are a host of technologies that we can be discussing around here. We could have an entire discussion this evening just based on all the different technologies that are out there. It would need to be an 8-hour webinar, and I don't think anybody wants that. But what I'm going to do tonight is quickly go through some of the more impactful ones that I see trending in our field. And I've put them in generally in a somewhat chronological order around things that are happening now that you could take advantage of, and things that might be a little further out. Now I go back to what I said earlier there. That's just kind of the structure. But if I'm talking about something that's now and things that are available now, and you're like, that's not even on our radar for today, or if I'm talking about things that like this is kind of coming in the future and you should be prepared for it, and you're like, we're playing in that space today, doesn't make any of that right or wrong. It's right or wrong within the context of your own organization. So with that little disclaimer, let's jump in. First trend. The exponential rise of video. Video has changed a lot. We used to talk about video, the rise of video was driven mostly by the ubiquitous nature that many of us share around bandwidth, that the barriers of can this person run video on their computer have in many of our environments been lifted, and it kind of leveled the playing field. That video was no longer a challenge to do. Anybody could do video. And I think now we're almost on the other side of that coin, especially even further emphasized by the pandemic, where our solution to how do we do learning when we can't be in person was, well, turn on your camera. And now everybody, even now, we're staring at each other on cameras. There is this exponential rise of video where everything is a default video based, and a lot of our content is video based. That is something we need to keep mindful of, both from a positive and negative standpoint. There's a lot of, first soapbox moment in a moment, there's a lot of discussion around video in the microlearning space, which I think has a huge amount of potential. But I personally, that phrase around microlearning, I tend to step away from it. And we'll get into a little bit as to why that is there. But we tend to default to video nowadays. You know, we're going to have a Zoom meeting. I mean, these days I find it charming and welcome when my phone rings, and it startles me because I very rarely get phone calls these days. But I've said to people, like, this is lovely. It's lovely to be talking to you, and not that I don't like the way that you look, but I'm happy to not be looking at you right now. I'm happy to just be able to talk to you on the phone, because that's the exception to the rule now. Video is almost the norm now. And I think we need to be a little bit mindful of that there is while I am sorry to Zoom that their brand has been attached to the label of Zoom fatigue. It's more video conferencing fatigue. But it's a real thing that people are just kind of, do I have to have the video on? Do I have to have it on at all times? We need to be mindful of that. Everybody is using video, and I think we just need to be reminding ourselves of how are we using video? Are we using video because it's the right medium for that particular time, or are we just doing it as a default? And that is a growing trend within our field. Another one, data and analytics. That's kind of the phrase that we hear a lot. I like the phrase data-informed learning strategies. For me, there's a big umbrella around data and analytics that is way wider than L&D. But for me, the real power of data and analytics in the context of L&D is around our ability to make more data, to develop more data-informed learning strategies. I genuinely wish, most of the images I use are kind of free stock imagery. This one is not. I wish I knew where this image came from so that I could credit it accordingly. But this to me is a very powerful image for the view that I have on the potential of data and analytics. We hear the phrase big data. Well, what's big data? It's data, but it's really, really big. That has no meaning to us. Big data is not about how big the data is. It's not even about the fact that computers are now able to, processors on computers are able to take these huge data sets and organize them, which is where the analytics comes in. It's more around the ability for us to make data informed decisions. Our data in L&D has historically been very, very weak, both in terms of the systems that we had to be able to collect data and our ability to leverage it. But now data is more commoditized in a lot of the organizations that we work for. And we have the ability to take data and use that data, come out with a question and come back with a data-informed answer that can influence the decisions that we make. And that's a really, really powerful difference in the future of L&D, to be able to get access to data and use that data to better target and iterate on our learning solutions that we're developing. And it's going to become a big part of the L&D skill set as we go forward. Talk about a lot of the platforms. There is a host of new platforms that are available to us as L&D professions. There are lots of them. We heard in the intro earlier around the LXP, the learning experience platforms. That's probably at the forefront of the conversations around learning platforms. But for me, it's less about a discussion about any one platform and more a discussion of the fact that we're no longer talking about just one platform. Technology in an L&D context for years started and ended around the learning management system, the LMS. And now we have new options that we can use, new tools, new platforms that enable us to track, measure, and implement different types of learning programs. The LXP is part of that portfolio. There are others as well. And we need to be cognizant of what these new technologies are and the doors that they open up to us. That's one of the biggest metaphors that I use when I talk about the learning technology landscape. Is there are doors that have historically been closed to us that are suddenly opening up. And it's we need to decide which doors we want to walk through. So platforms are a big piece of it. I mentioned earlier the discussion around microlearning. There's a growing discussion around there's a growing discussion in our field today that is wrapped up around an existing discussion that's been going on for decades. We've changed the label many times over the years. It used to be performance support, then it became microlearning. We're hearing workflow learning used a lot. This is all I was talking about this in the context of my work before I even knew it was kind of a discipline or a thing. I described it when I was a training director in finance many lifetimes ago. Just as, you know what, people are really busy. We need to find the least disruptive way to solve their problem so that they can get back to work. And technology has always limited what we can do there. We had job aids and things of that sort, analog things that we could do to give people the solution that they needed while they were working. I mean, training has historically been the most disruptive way to solve a performance problem. You literally needed to stop someone from working in order to show them how to do it differently so they could go back and implement that. And all of these things, performance support, workflow learning, microlearning, they are all playing in the space of minimizing the friction, giving people the opportunity to get the support that they need to do the job where it is. I use workflow learning as the label on this because to me, it's the first label that has not yet been co-opted. But B is very definitional about what it is. It's very much straightforward. This is exactly what it is. It's finding ways to give people the learning that they need within the workflow. So it's a very powerful thing to me. I see on-demand learning. We've called it lots of things. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about microlearning, I think I might have mentioned in the intro that there's a lot of buzzwords that fly around the industry. I try not to use buzzwords, mainly because of the way that I personally define buzzwords. It's another one of those soapbox moments. I hate buzzwords because of the way I define them. I define a buzzword as a term whose usage has spread faster than its understanding. And there are a lot of buzzwords in L&D. It's one of the reasons that I step away from microlearning. There's nothing wrong at the core definition of what microlearning is. So I'm not against microlearning, but I do feel it's a term that has been co-opted in many ways to mean something different than what its true value is. A lot of the conversations you see around microlearning center around the micro of the content. If I see one more discussion online about if it's over 4 minutes, is it microlearning, or does it have to be between 2 minutes and 40 seconds and 2 minutes and 45 seconds for it to really be microlearning? And that gets us off the value path. It's not about for me, it's not about the micro of the content, it's about the micro of the context, the specificity of what it is someone is trying to do, and are we matching the resource that we're giving that person in that moment, that exactly what they need at that particular moment. If you're not familiar with Bob Mosier and Conrad Gottfriedsen's work around the 5 moments of need, it is a very informative thing to check out. Just Google that and it'll bring you right to them. Very informative work that kind of helps shape that lens around whatever label you're using it, on-demand, workflow learning, performance support, micro-learning, or whatever comes next. It's all about understanding meeting people where they are to give them support while they're doing it. And the reality is this is a big trend because technology was always a big barrier of being able to do our work differently, but now we have more and more options to exist in the space with people's work and supporting them in that manner. All right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, move on to the next one. Next thing on the list, personalized and adaptive learning. Damn it, I'm gonna get right back on the soapbox. All right, so personalized and adaptive learning. These are other buzzwords that are out there. This is something we've been inching our way towards. Now, one of the things you have to be mindful of when you're dealing with marketing that comes from exhibitors, and this is coming from someone who hosts expos. Like, I think they're really important and I think they do a really good job. But the reality is, if you walk around the expo, you'll see a lot of platforms and tools that are out there that talk about how they deliver personalized learning programs. I personally do not necessarily think we have yet. It's another term, personalization, that is, I think, being co-opted in a way. We hear about the phrase, another buzzword that goes out around is around the Netflix of learning. And Netflix is not, in my opinion, personalized in a learning context. To have things referred to you based on your interests is very powerful and tool, but it's not, and it's personalized in in a limited definition. But learning is about growth, and for me, if it's not about finding me things that are already within my comfort zone, personalizing it so I can see things that are in my comfort zone. Personalization is about growth. It's about meeting me where I'm at from a competency standpoint and giving me the resources that are necessary that I can stretch from there. So if for me, the real power of personalized learning is when we get to a point, and we're not there yet, in my opinion, or at least it's not normalized for mass adoption, where personalization is really about meeting people based on where they are for their competency and giving them the appropriate resources to grow from there. Adaptive learning is another piece of it. Adaptive learning is adapting to what people are doing, and there's more reasonable adoption of that, but it's all linked in with personalization, adaptation, and we have to understand what's going on within those tools and how we can use that in the work that we do. Next one on the list, AI and automation. This is always a big one that people want to explore. This, to me, is not a tool. People are always kind of looking at it from the standpoint of what's the AI tool. And we joked earlier about the ChatGPT. That's kind of a specific example of a tool where AI is being used in practice. But that's one specific example that is getting a lot of attention right now. But we have to understand that AI is the real power of AI in the work that we do is its invisibility. It's where it's powering things that we do, where you don't think of it as AI, you just think of it as how things work. AI is a very, very powerful thing that is becoming embedded into just everyday interactions that we do. And how is that going to influence what we do? And it's powering this other side of the coin around automation. Now, automation to me, I think is a very important piece of the L&D puzzle, because we support work. And the more things that are automated within the world of work, the more it changes the paradigm of what we do. There are going to be things that if a human needed to do it yesterday and that has been automated tomorrow, we don't need to support the human's ability to do that anymore. But we do need to support people's ability to work within increasingly automated worlds. And so understanding how this whole automation piece is changing the context of your world is a really important piece of the puzzle. There's a flip side of this that I think is also often overlooked in the context of L&D. Most of the conversations I see hosted around automation and artificial intelligence in L&D is, broadly speaking and dramatically speaking, under the heading of what does L&D do when the robots take over? And there's an element to that. Kidding aside, there's an element to that of what is our role? What are we supporting? If there's increasing levels of automation and AI is empowering a lot of this automation, what are we doing? Well, we're focusing on the human elements. The power of AI is for technology to automate rote tasks that humans are doing today so that humans can focus on more human elements value of work that we do. And our role in supporting those uniquely human elements is going to continue. But there's a flip side of this of it's not just the workforce that's being automated. It's what are the things in L&D that can be automated? And I think that that's a critical piece. As much as we joke about things like ChatGPT and tools like it, there are people that look at that and say, well, why do I need someone to write this article for me when I can just type in a request to ChatGPT and it'll give me the article? That's not that far of a leap from, well, why do I need someone to develop this e-learning course when I can have this tool that I give it some context and it generates the e-learning course for me? So we need to be understanding what's going on around it and think about it, what it means to the implications of the work that we do. Are those tools threatening to our work? Are those tools enabling our work that enables us to do some of the stuff easier? We need to keep our eye on that and find, just the same way our workforces are kind of looking at it and say, what can we automate to make ourselves a more efficient organization? We should kind of be looking at it the same way, not that these tools are a threat, but what are these tools possibly enabling us to do in terms of automating some of the stuff that we do on a daily basis that is just taking up time so that we can focus on doing the core things, the really important aspects of our work more effectively. ChatGPT is a great example of something that you could explore just to kind of play in that space. Now, I'm not saying that ChatGPT is a tool that you should use for L&D. That's for other people to pose questions about, to try to get likes on LinkedIn. That's not what I'm here for. But I do think that when you see a tool like that coming out, playing with it, just so you can kind of have some context of what it does and how it works, kind of enables you when the time comes to connect dots a little bit easier. So I think that that's a big part of it. All right, and one more item on the list, because I think it's an important one for us to talk through. Ooh, that's a scroll wheel. That's not the one I wanted to hit. Is around immersive learning technology. We're hearing this is a little bit more practical for a lot of people. Some people are playing with VR. The reason I leave this for last is because, what is the tool that I just mentioned that someone check out? I see that comment from Dana. That was ChatGPT. It is a very common, it's one of the biggest buzzwords around AI right now. It's a tool that you can ask it a question and it will literally answer the question. And people are using it as a writing assistant tool, as an example. There are a lot of people who will say, write me a marketing blog for such and such thing, and it will literally go to the internet and find things out about that topic and come back with something that you can write.
Or term papers.
Term papers. Yeah.
There's a whole thing about that in education right now, of the fear of students using it.
Oh, absolutely. I literally just had this conversation with my son this past week. My son came in the room all excited. My son's 14 years old. He's like, Dad, have you heard about ChatGPT? I was like, yeah, actually, I was just talking to some people online about it. It's really cool. We've been playing it. We've been checking it out in school. It's really, really cool. It does all these cool things. It's like, you know what's even cooler than ChatGPT? And he was like, what? I was like, the tools that Google is coming out with that teachers can use to find out that whether or not someone is doing their homework with ChatGPT. In the room, you could have heard a pin drop when I said it. He's like, stop. I'm like, no, I'm totally serious. He's like, you're messing with me. You're doing that thing. You're just messing with me. I said, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. That's for you to decide if you want to take that chance. And he's just started talking to me again. But it is a very growing thing. But immersive technologies that we have here. So I put this last here because immersive technologies to me is not about VR. It's not about AR, and it's certainly not about the metaverse, which if you ask, it's one of those weird math equations where if you ask 100 different people to define the metaverse, somehow you come out with 120 different definitions. But the metaverse is a distraction from the conversation. I think immersive learning technologies to me is inclusive of VR, it's inclusive of AR, but it's more about this lens of how can I get people more engaged? How can I get people to go through a learning experience rather than a learning content piece? How can I get people to be part of the learning experience more so that it can be more impactful for them. These are all real tools, VR and AR, that can solve multiple problems, but I think the lens through which we look at these tools of not so much what does the tool say it can do, but how can I leverage this in my work is really powerful. Now, before I shift gears a little bit, and I'm sorry, Dana, you couldn't understand what I said. I talk really fast, I've been told, so I apologize if that's a factor here. Before I shift gears from technologies to the environment, everything there's more that I could have added to this list, but some of this is an aspect of L&D that I think is really important. Some of the things that I mentioned here, you might say that's a tool that can apply to my organizations. Others you might look at and say that's not even on our radar. I don't care about that. It doesn't apply to my work. And I challenge you on the second part of that statement, because the reality is, just because of a technology that is available and is disrupting work today doesn't apply to your work, doesn't mean it won't apply to you tomorrow. There's a possibility that in the future, somebody could knock on your door and say, hey, listen, we're plugging in a new HRIS system, and it's going to plug into the LXP that we just bought for your system. And it's also going to talk to the LMS, and it's going to be tied into all of our frontline applications so that we get a better understanding of all the competencies and what people are actively doing. And we're going to schedule a meeting for next week so we can kick off this project. You don't want to get that knock on the door and say, that all sounds great, just give me 20 minutes to Google everything that you just said. You want to develop enough awareness of what's going on within your organization and what's going on within the technology landscape. So even if you're not necessarily driving a change, you can be in a better position to participate in the conversation around the change if it's presented to you. The other reason I think it's important is just because some technology or a methodology or anything that was related to L&D work doesn't apply to the job you have today, it might apply to the job you want tomorrow. So having a broad awareness of what's going on within the L&D space, the technologies that are kind of shaping the future of where this industry will go, is going to help you both in terms of the work that you can do for the organizations you serve today, but also the organizations that you might want to work for tomorrow. Okay, I didn't disclaim that was a soapbox moment, but it was, and I'm going to get off. All right, so shifting gears. And by all means, I'll reiterate, if anyone has any questions, put them in chat or unmute yourself, which also give me a chance to take it right. Okay, next up, let's talk about the environment, non-technology trends that are impacting learning that also influences. The first one I'll throw out there is the rising digital competency requirement. The fact that you're here probably already means that you're ahead of this curve. But for a lot of people, the idea of everything's going online is still something they're getting used to. It's still something that feels uncomfortable. It's still something that they struggle with. I remember when the pandemic first hit, and my son's school sent out an email to all the parents explaining how they were going to address going online. And I read that and I was like, oh my goodness, the amount of phone calls that they're going to get. Because I knew it, I read and I was able to see everything that was in there and I understood exactly what was going to happen. But I also understood it enough to know that they used enough jargon that no one outside of our industry was going to have a clue. And that's exactly what happened. And there are a lot of people that we are changing in a whatever this hybrid workplace ultimately winds up looking like in the new normal. The need for us to do work and interact with one another in a digital environment is going to take up a larger slice of the pie. And we have to be mindful of not everybody is going to adapt to that change as quickly. As we develop learning programs, even something as simple as no problem, we're going to put things up on Zoom. We have to recognize that there might be 1 or 2 people in that room of 20 that struggle with that transition. And how are we adapting to help them not get lost in the transition? So we have to be mindful of, if we're going to be doing things in a digital realm, we might need to put some frameworks and support systems to help people be successful in that transition. We also have to be mindful of the new work environment when people are working from home, and it's different than being in the office in many, many ways. We usually see it in stock imagery like this of the person working and being in a Zoom room. But what's interesting is a lot of the stock imagery that talks about hybrid workforces and people work from home, it needs to zoom out. beyond this screen and give it more of the truth of what's going on outside when you zoom out. And it looks a little bit more like this, where you've got the person doing the work, but they've got the kids at the table, one being tutored, and the husband who's also working from home is on the cell phone. It is a very, very different environment. And we need to be cognizant of that, of when we're developing these hybrid learning programs, or even the virtual learning programs that are virtual first, being cognizant of the fact that people are not at their desks in an office environment where they have a full attention on their work. There are distractions, and we need to be aware of that. We need to be empathetic of that, and we need to factor that into the designs and how we're using these technologies. Next one. I want to talk a little bit about hybrid. Now, disclaimer before I go any further. This image may be something that you have seen online in the past. It is very popular on social media, and there are a lot of discussions that challenge this image's representation of the difference between equality and equity. And then if you're interested in that conversation, I encourage you to Google that, because it is a great conversation that helps frame how you view equality and equity, because there are limitations here. But I want to talk about this image specifically in the context of our work in hybrid learning environments, because technically, where a lot of times when people talk about the difference between equality and equity, they're talking about it in the context of, can everybody participate? And on the left of this image, you've got somebody you can't see over the fence, they can't see the game, but by giving everybody a different level of boxes, everybody can see over the fence, everybody gets the same experience. But and this to me is really representative of hybrid, because the reality is when you look at it through that lens, not everybody is getting the same experience. The three people on the outside of the fence you could make the argument that they're having a similar experience, but they're still not in the seats. They're still not in the stadium. And that's very much a good metaphor for what I see around hybrid learning these days, in the sense of, if we're just allowing people who aren't in the room to see what's happening in the room, that is not equity. That is not people who are getting the same experience. That is accommodating people who can't be in the room at the bare minimum level of requirement. It is not to say that now we have equity between these two audiences of the in-person and the virtual audience. Give you two additional things, kind of soapbox around that. I distinctly remember a great example of this is I distinctly remember there was a period midway through the pandemic where they had returned to in-person, but if you were tested positive or you were sick, you could join the class hybrid. And I walked into my son's room in the middle of class, and I said, "Why aren't you in class?" And he turned around and said, "Shh, I am in class." And I was like, "What am I looking at?" And he's like, "Oh, the camera fell and nobody realizes it." Because I was looking at the image of the screen, like the ceiling. And I was like, "How long has it been?" "About an hour and a half." And nobody realized that the camera wasn't off. They were just basically getting an audio recording of the teacher talking. Another example that I use a little bit more practically in my own experience. We at the Learning Guild have made a conscious decision at this point to not offer a hybrid option for our conferences. Admittedly, I catch a lot of crap for that decision, but there's a reason for that. Because I don't personally feel that technology has delivered on a true hybrid learning experience. Usually what you get is a voyeuristic option to watch what other people are experiencing. And that's not necessarily bad. I mean, if your option is you get nothing or you get to watch it, it's not necessarily bad, but it is different. As I mentioned, I speak at a lot of events, and I've had multiple opportunities to speak at events that are hybrid. And even the best examples that I've seen of that in practice, where they have dedicated people who are managing the virtual audience, and there's dedicated time for that producer who's behind the scenes managing the virtual audience to interject the questions that they get. It's different. I mean, I even through my best efforts and the best efforts of the organization, I'm essentially doing something for the people that are in the room, giving the people who are watching what's going on in the room the opportunity to ask questions. I'm not reacting to what I'm seeing from people in the room, which I often do when I'm doing a presentation. It's just different. So we have made the decision that we're going to do an in-person conference, and then we'll do a virtual option for that is separately, that is virtual first. And it's going to be, when we did DevLearn and we weren't able to do it in person, we did the DevLearn digital experience. And I challenged people to say, if we're not doing DevLearn, we're doing the DevLearn digital experience because we don't have a face-to-face option. It's digital first. What does that mean? What does that look like? It doesn't look like just taking the content and putting it online. It looks like a digital environment. What does that look like? And I think that that's, in my opinion, the technologies that are out there just don't deliver a true equitable hybrid learning experience, and we have opportunities to improve that. Someone is working, there are lots of investments around there that are getting us closer to that, and whoever cracks that nut first will make a huge amount of money, but we're not there yet. See a question from Dave. Dev tools and platforms like Articulate are closed to many of the technologies that you have mentioned. What do you see changes to these dev platforms? How will future courses be developed? Good question. And I'm going to take the specific tool out of the equation there, but there we've got dev tools that create a specific type of content. And some of that content is not as applicable to other environments as it might be. So if I was going to be doing a live online event, then I don't see myself leveraging e-learning development tools, traditional e-learning development tools, to support that quite as much, unless it's for pre-reading. I mean, for me, there's no tool that's good or bad. It's more, are you using it in the right context? So I think that I think the platforms like the development tools that you mentioned serve a very, very valuable purpose that occupies a very important part of our pie. But we need to be mindful of, are we using it in the right context? So I hope that adds some context to your comment there, Dave. All right, next one here. I'll get off my soapbox. I've been on it a lot. Resiliency. We hear that's another buzzword that's out there. We have to build resiliency. What is L&D's role in that space? For me, the space around resiliency is reducing the friction, being empathetic, being mindful, some kind of stuff I mentioned around digital competencies of just being mindful that not everyone adapts to this sort of environment as easily, being empathetic of that, finding ways that we can put support structures in place, and just being mindful of when we go through a disruption like we just did. People are carrying a lot of weight. Some of it isn't the weight in the environment that they are working in. Some of it is environment that they walked in from, because we've all got stuff going on at home. The more mindful and empathetic we are of that, the more we will help people build their resiliency in the organizations that we work. And while that may not necessarily be a resiliency training program, keeping that lens at the forefront and when we are building our learning programs can help us just improve the lives of the people that we're working with. Another buzzword that we're hearing is around enhancing the employee experience. This gets into this blurry space between HR and learning. But it is a growing space of there are organizations are prioritizing. We want to be an employer of choice. We want to provide a great employee experience for people. We are a primary touch point with our employees. We set expectations about what it means to interact with one another and what it means to support a positive employee experience. Do people have the right framework to do their job? Do they have the tools? Do they have the support structures to do their job? We play an important role in that space. And I expect the expectations in our organizations to reflect that going forward. Are we checking the box of, yes, we delivered a particular training program and it is done? Or are we creating an experience that people are embracing and finding to add value to their experience of working in our organizations? Another buzzword, oh God, I keep hitting on all the buzzwords. So upskilling and reskilling. We're hearing that a lot. I expect this to be a large portion of the old work that we are historically doing. And I mean that in the context of, for a lot of organizations, trainers and those in L&D are in the course delivery business, where someone comes to you and says, I need you to deliver a course on XYZ. That's not as consultative as we could be, but that is the reality that a lot of us live in. And I expect upskilling and reskilling to be a part of that as we go forward, where people are like, we need to focus on upskilling. HR decides that they need to focus on upskilling and reskilling our workforce because of some of the disruptions we have going on And we need to provide these resources to our people where it's more prescriptive coming through L&D and something that we need to deliver upon. I also think that we also need to flip that coin and think about what do we need to upskill and reskill within our own skill sets. It's an important question to ask of ourselves. All right, so we've gone through a lot of environmental elements. The environment is changing a lot. So we talked about technologies, talked about a lot of the environmental things that are there. I've basically thrown repeatedly a lot of weights at you that I'm expecting you to carry them all at the same time. So it can feel overwhelming to look at all the changes. I mean, we've been through disruptions in L&D in the past. I've been in this field for a number of hair colors. And there's been a lot of disruptions, but what's different about this environment that we're in now as compared to the past, like you take I'll date myself, carbon date myself a little bit here, but you take the introduction of the personal computer when that came into workforces, and for those of you that might be a little younger, yes, this existed. When that came about and this idea of e-learning emerged, that was really disruptive. Like training existed in a classroom, and now you want me to do it on a computer. That was really, really disruptive. And for those of you that lived through that, you know how disruptive that was to the world of training and development. That was one technology that emerged that disrupted things, and we all had to adapt to. What's different about today is there are multiple technologies emerging that are changing not only the face of L&D, but the face of work in an environment where we're just coming out of the pandemic and we're coming out of this new normal. There are multiple things we are in a constant state of change, and that can feel overwhelming. And one of the things I think is really important, and one of the things I hope you get out of our conversation here today, is disruption is a neutral word. Disruption is not positive or negative. What makes a disruption positive or negative is not the change, but how we view the change, how we react to the change. And I'm a big believer that there's opportunity in everything, no matter how bad it is. If you frame your mindset right, there are opportunities. So I want to shift gears now and talk about that. In fact, despite everything that's going on here, what are the opportunities that I see within the L&D field right now? And there are a bunch of them. The first thing is we have the ability to be more agile. Agile is a buzzword. I'm not talking about agile, the buzzword, but for a lot of us, we do what we do in training because that's what's expected of us. That's what we do here. I can't tell you how many organizations I spoke to that we don't do virtual learning here for years. And then this thing called the pandemic came up, and it was just kind of like, well, I guess we do virtual learning now. And it kind of forced people to adapt. We had to solve problems rather than just delivering programs. We had to get more involved in solving problems. And there's more that subtle shift of training delivery platform to help us solve problems gives you permission to be more agile. We got permission's a big word for me. I prefer to ask for forgiveness rather than permission in the way that I work. That's worked both for me and against me in my career. But I think in the context of the disruptions that we were all in, for a lot of us, we got permission to do things we might not have necessarily had permission to do in the past. And we don't want to lose that. And being more agile is a part of that. Next one, we have the ability to be more experimental. For a lot of us over the last couple of years, we were forced to do things we haven't done before. We were forced to try new things. And we shouldn't lose that just because things are getting a little calmer and it's not necessarily disruptive as much as it is. We should embrace that. The fact that we were pushed to do that, what did we learn from it? What can we harness from that experience so that we can be more experimental and try new things in the work that we do? We also have the ability to develop conversational competence. Admittedly, soapbox moment, that's a phrase that I find myself saying more and more. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Conversational competence to me is knowing enough about what's going on in your organization and what's going on in your field so that you can participate in conversations about it. We've been talking as long as I've been in this field about the need for learning to get a seat at the table. And what gets learning a seat at the table is not being able to just do learning. It's being able to put learning in the context of everything else that's around it. And you don't necessarily have to be an expert on anything, but you should have enough conversational competence about the things that are important in your organization to at least participate in that conversation. If you can demonstrate that level of competence, that you can at least participate in conversations about something, that's going to be transformative to the careers. And I think we have that's an opportunity for us. We will push into new spaces, enable us to play in new spaces, and we should continue to do that so that we can develop this level of competence that at least enables us to participate in more conversations in our organization. We mentioned earlier, and some of us just deliver platforms and courses. We have the opportunity to be more consultative. I mentioned earlier, a lot of us were put in positions where we just needed to solve problems in the moment. That put us in a more consultative position in our organizations than we've been in the past, and we should harness that. We shouldn't let that go. We should lean further into that and create that impression in our organizations that we're here to help you solve your performance problem. We're not just here to deliver training. And I think we have an opportunity here to reframe this phrase digital learning. It's a buzzword that's kind of gone a little by the wayside in recent years. I love the term digital learning. What I hate is the fact that it's been co-opted, because I think we focused on the wrong word here. I think a lot of the digital learning conversations that I see are really conversations around digital teaching or digital education. And that's not the same thing. It's not that I think education is bad. It's not that I think training is bad. I think it's bad to merge those two words with learning, because when you look at job descriptions for digital learning director or director of digital learning, whatever it happens to be, and you look at the roles that are in there and the responsibilities, they're all education responsibilities. And I think that misses an enormous opportunity for us. Learning happens well beyond the educational environment, and we are increasingly just working and living in a digital environment. What does it mean? What are the behaviors of being in a digital environment that are supportive of learning? And that's not a conversation around how do we do educational programs in digital platforms. It's more about how can we learn from and with each other in a digital environment. And if we look at it through that lens, there's a huge opportunity to reframe what people think of when they think of digital learning, because it is a much, much bigger world than just digital teaching. Off the soapbox again. And the last thing on the list of opportunities is I do think if we do these things, we can be seen more as leaders in our organization. Again, going back to that, it's not just about the seat at the table. What earns you the seat at the table is everything that I talked about now, but doing it incrementally over time so that you're seen as a leader in your organization, so that you're seen as someone that takes charge of things. All the metaphors and all of the labels that we try to apply to this prototype of what a leader means, doing these sorts of things and taking this sort of approach to our work gets us to be seen as leaders. So, throwing a lot at you. I want to close the presentational part of this discussion. Oh, I see another question coming in. Do I see a marriage between learning and coaching? Marriage is a good word for that, because marriage can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I see a very strong relationship between learning and coaching. So I think that marriage analogy works very, very well. But I also see that there are times where learning and coaching don't always mesh as well and need to just do things on their own. And for many of us, that marriage metaphor may not work as well in that context. So I think that there's a stronger relationship between learning and coaching if we're applying these tools appropriately. But it's not necessarily that these things always need to go together. I think one, if used appropriately, each can enhance the other. So I like to close presentations like this because a lot of what I've done right now is kind of framing a lens, providing you with I hope a lens through which to look at work a little bit differently. But I hate presentations that are just theoretical. So even a theoretical presentation like this that is more about the lens through which we approach our work, I like to find some ways to make it a little bit practical. So how do we start putting this stuff into practice? How do we harness these opportunities that I'm talking about here? How do we put them into practice? I am a very, very big believer in the power of questions and being intentional about asking ourselves questions. And I think that there are three that I'll leave you with here today that can help you frame this lens to make it more part of your practice, and to help you do this more regularly. The first one is literally asking ourselves the question, what is the opportunity? To pause and do that. I think we're coming out of the best, one of the best examples of this, even coming out of the last 2 years of the pandemic, which, full acknowledgement, tragic period in our history, something that I hope none of us ever have to live through again. And you know, I've lost people that are close to me through the experience. I don't minimize any of that by saying there's opportunity. I acknowledge all of that. But even in the worst possible situation, there are always, no matter how bad the crisis is, there are always opportunities if you force yourself to search for them. Everything that we've gone through over the last 2 years, all the challenges that we've had, all the hair that we've pulled out, there are things that we did in there that created opportunities. We were forced to do some different things. We were a rubber band that was stretched over the last 2 years. And now we're at the point now where we can either let go and allow that rubber band to snap back where it was, or put support structures in place so that that becomes our new normal, that wherever we were stretched to, that instead of allowing that rubber band to stretch back, we look for ways to stretch even further. There are opportunities to do that, but I think we need to be mindful of stepping back and asking ourselves that question. What are the opportunities? And force yourself, give yourself time to identify them. I've gone through literal tactical exercises where I've gone through something. I'm like, all right, what are 5 opportunities that are in there? And you get usually, or 10. And usually if you do something with a team, you'll get 3 or 4 knee-jerk reactions. If we could do this, we can do that. And they might be valuable, but they're not as powerful as the ones that people have to sit back and think on. And like, oh, well, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? So consciously ask yourself, what are the opportunities? The next one that I would recommend you ask is quite possibly the most ironic question I think we have to ask ourselves as L&D professionals, but it's literally, what have we learned through this? As training and development, one of the greatest ironies I think is in our field. As training and development professionals, most of us know that reflection is one of the most powerful tools for learning. Yet, despite that, it's something that we as learning professionals do not prioritize with the weight that we should in our own work. And I think that if we allocate time to do this, to sit back and reflect and think, what did we learn through this? How can we do things differently? We can really come up with some powerful opportunities there. For me, and again, it's the practicality of this, for me, it's the prioritization. Anytime, one of the first things I ever did when I was a learning professional, when I was actively working in an organization, and we had a timeline and we put the milestones that were out there, one of the milestones that was always added, and it was on the calendar, was the reflection, was the, let's get back, you could call it a debrief, you could call it whatever you want, but it's not a practical thing. It is a literal sit back and what did we learn from this? What are some of the things that we can do? And going through the exercise of reflecting on it, and not just reflecting on what we learned, but what are we going to do differently based on what we learned? And literally, even something as simple as putting it on the calendar as something that is going to be protected time to do that can be transformative in the way that you approach the work. And the last question that I would add that I recommend putting on there is really a broader one. It kind of steps back and is like, what is a question that can just change the way, the approach that you do that? And for me, it's a very simple question of, how can I help? It's a simple question, and it may not necessarily be very practical in the context of L&D, but it is extremely powerful. This is my desk at home. I'm coming to you from California right now, but this is my desk at home. And I literally have a Post-it note on the bottom of my monitor that just says, how can I help today? And it is there as a constant reminder. Sometimes I read it consciously, sometimes it's just there and I look, but it frames that mindset of every approach that I do. I'm a big believer of Post-it notes. If you saw behind my desk at home, you'd think I have like some sort of diagnosable problem. And for all I know, I might. But there are little reminders that I have up there all the time that are just there. This is important to me, and I want to remind myself of it consciously and subconsciously. But this one's right on my monitor, because I do think it's one of the reasons I got into this field. We are in the growth business, and we are always have an opportunity to lift people up and have them be greater than they were before. Learning is an extremely powerful tool to do that. And if we approach our work through this lens of service, as some people have called it, or just I look at it more simply as what can I do to help somebody today, it can really be transformative in terms of the way that we approach our work. So with that, we're going to get into a Q&A in a second. I know this does close the more formal part of the presentation. When I started, I did show this QR code, and I did say for those of you that stuck around to the end, I would show you how to do this. And for those of you who might be watching the recording of this, who heard that at the beginning, skipped the entire presentation and just wanted to see how I do this, congratulations for cheating, you win the game. So here's how this works. It's all part of the LinkedIn app on your phone. If you have the LinkedIn app, you just need, if you don't have it, download it. But as soon as you launch the LinkedIn app, it leaves you in the feed of anything that's in there. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to the top of the screen where that search bar is, and just touch it, and it'll bring you to the search screen. And when you get to that search screen, it'll bring you to a bunch of different options that you might want to search for. It gives you the option to type in, but in the upper right-hand corner, right in that search bar, got a little picture of a QR code. You choose that, it'll bring you directly to this code that I had. Now, if this is a great networking tool at a conference, rather than business cards, we have this out, just kind of, hey, you know, want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you just show this up, and literally you scan that with just a regular camera app on your phone, it will immediately connect you with someone on LinkedIn. It's got a scan option there where you can bring up your camera within the LinkedIn app to do it with somebody else. What I did is I used the share my code option that's there so that I could email it to myself to bring it into this presentation. You also have the option to share it to your photos, so you don't have to bring in the LinkedIn app. You can just bring up that code. But it's a great way to just very quickly scan and connect with someone on LinkedIn. And if you are watching the recording or if you're here live, if you haven't already done so, feel free to scan that QR code. If you have any questions afterwards, after you watch the video, feel free to reach out to me. It's one of the best ways to communicate with me. And I'm gonna stop talking unless people want to have any questions. So I appreciate you all being here. Any other questions that people want to have, I'm happy to explore at this point.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I am a consultant, an instructional design consultant, and a lot of what I'm seeing is kind of non-training technology creeping in and affecting kind of design. So for example, the move from WebEx Training Center and, you know, Adobe Connect to Microsoft Teams, which is definitely not a learning platform, right? Or even like people wanting the Instagramification or TikTokification of training, right? And they're like, can we just make it like one of these little things you scroll through? And so I'm seeing a lot of that kind of buzzwords, as you would say, kind of driving design and driving kind of the ask that I'm getting, rather than kind of maybe a purposeful driven, you know, what is the content? What are our expectations driving the conversation, or even the technology that's chosen?
So two immediate thoughts to that. The first is around the commentary, or the comment you made at the start around people are bringing non-training technologies into the training discussion. That in and of itself, I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. Just in the context of like, and I say this as someone who works for an organization that hosts these expos. One of the biggest shows that our larger company runs in London is called the Learning Technologies Expo. And as much as it's a great show and I love the brand, it's not an accurate brand, because you walk in there to that exhibition, you're not seeing learning technologies, you're seeing training and education technologies. And that's not necessarily bad or worse, it's just an acknowledgement of what it's. Someone coming to you with a tool that's not necessarily a training technology does not necessarily mean it can't be a learning technology. So that's the first thing. But to the larger discussion that you had there, it can be a challenge in the discussion that you have. So how do we respond to those sorts of requests? The first thing that I did, and admittedly, it took me about 15-20 years of my own experience to get to this point, so I understand it's not a challenging, it can be a challenging thing, is to remove myself from the equation. And what I mean by that is there is not a learning program that I've ever developed that was mine. It was somebody else's. I helped them to develop it. What my job was to deliver upon what they needed and to be more as consultative as I could be within that. So I want you to come in and do a TikTok. Now my interior voice might come in and say, that's insane. But my external voice, hopefully, will probably reframe that. I'll have a filter. But I'll start from the place of, okay, interesting. Why do you want to go in that direction? No judgment, no there, but tell me more about why you want to do that. Get some context of it. And again, no judgment. Kind of, that's what they want to do. That's what we want to start. But be willing to deliver upon that. But when they get to the point, when you get asked a couple of questions, you find out why they want to do that, and you get some understanding of what the performance need is. Say, all right, so I can do what you're asking. Get to the point, whether it's in the conversation or whether you're coming back and saying, all right, I can do what you're answering, and I can see this being a benefit. I can also see us doing this, and here's what we'd be doing. Here's the benefits of doing it your way and the drawbacks of it. Here's another option that I would recommend. Here are the benefits that are different than what you would get here as compared to doing that. And I would recommend that you do go there. And this is that, and that's, there are challenges to that conversation, but I think the hardest part, at least it was for me, was getting to the point where I could present those options and be at peace. In the sense of, they may still be like, I want TikTok, it's cool.
Mhm.
Okay, then I'll deliver that for you. But even then, what's the opportunity in that? Because it can feel like a defeating thing. The opportunity in that, and I have experienced this in myself, the opportunity in that is by having that discussion and still doing what they want and presenting the options, you start to reframe what you are to them. You start to, but when you have those successes, and you start having those conversations, you start to reframe my job here is to help you. My job here is to be consultative to you and help solve your problems. And by presenting it in the sense of, you told me your problem was this, and I think doing it this way will provide more value to that goal. Even if they decide to go the other way, you're still presenting it in the sense of, this is my job here. So there are going to be wins in that environment. There are going to be losses in that environment. And the hardest thing for me going through that was just making peace with my job is to present you with the options and to persuade you to make the right decision, but ultimately it is your decision.
Mhm.
And finding peace within that.
Thank you.
No problem. Hope it was helpful.
Hey, David, I'm really curious to know this VR, who's using that? What kind of organizations, roles, and can you comment on the velocity of its adoption?
Sure. So VR is a real tool that is applicable today. Like you can use it to solve problems. So the first thing that I will say is, where do I see the use case? When you have high risk training, when you have a high risk performance initiative, high risk work, where literally it is high cost, the cost of failing to do that job effectively is substantial, either in dollars or in human life. Then the ability to find a way for you to practice such task in a safe environment becomes very important. So VR, where it is today, there is adoption in these contexts. So you see it a lot in healthcare and firefighting, places where literally the risk of failure is life and death. Creating an environment where people can practice that task safely, it becomes really, the investment becomes worth it. And that's kind of where VR is right now. It's in order to do it well and to have it be performing, it's a very expensive value proposition. I mean, I am a big proponent of VR. I love VR. One of the things I like about my job is I can get all of these tools shipped to my house from Amazon, and my wife's like, what the hell's going on? I'm like, sweetie, it's research. So I like VR. I think VR is a very, very powerful tool. But one of the first experiences that I ever, and this is where the risk comes in. One of the first experiences that I went through with VR, it was a learn about the solar system from Neil deGrasse Tyson. And it was like a trifecta of things that I was interested in. Like, wow, I like VR. I'm a big fan of astronomy. And take care, Kay. I see the comment in there. Thank you so much. And I'm a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I went in and I was like, this is cool. So I got put on the headset and I find myself in an auditorium with a whole bunch of seats. And using VR, I could choose whatever seat that I wanted to sit in. And then I chose my seat and I hit a button on my wrist that said start presentation, and then out on stage walks an avatar of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who starts lecturing me, and I saw learning objectives appear on the PowerPoint screen behind him. And I was like, I'm out. Like that's a waste of VR. That's VR for VR's sake. It's not embracing the immersion of it. So the last thing I'll say to your question, and if that's a follow-up, by all means, we can explore it. I'll connect this to a question I'm often asked that people
Okay.
are often surprised by the answer I get. Like, I'll put in the context of VR. How do I know that it's a good time for me to invest in VR? That's a common version of the question. And they're expecting some level of, do this, do that, do that. But really, the conversation starts with a very simple question. What problem is it going to solve for you today that you can't solve? What is it going to, or subsequent question, what is it going to enable you to do more effectively today than you were doing yesterday? And the reality is, if you can't very definitively answer that question, then you should significantly pause before making that investment. Because I do think that VR has a very, very powerful use case that if you exist in this small slice of the pie where high risk need to practice, that VR can be a tool that can solve the problem no other tool can do. And that's a very powerful use case. But so I see VR emerging as a very, very powerful tool that can enable us to solve problems that we weren't able to solve before. But the use cases are very, very limited right now based on the expense of cash. It was probably started as a yes or no question.
No. It was a very insightful answer, and I appreciate it very much when you described the best use cases. There's high consequence. It made me think about pilots and the simulation training, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
see the comment from
surprised.
Nadine
Thanks
in
to
chat.
everybody else who commented, but it's like healthcare is leading the way in our group.
Yeah, and I see the comment from Nadine in chat around patients and treatment. There's one of the other use cases that is a little bit lower on the expense side that is getting traction is around, and I will broadly put it in the sense of finding a way to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So giving you even something as simple as 360 video, although that's not as immersive as it could be, is a very low hanging fruit where you can see an experience through someone else's eyes. We always struggle with, we talk about empathy being so important, but we struggle with finding ways to put that in a traction practical way. And VR in many ways can do that in putting yourself, letting you experience the life through the eyes of someone else. It's a very powerful way to do it.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem.
David, Annalisa Delgado here. I have a question for you in regards to reskilling and upskilling. It's all the big rage in my organization right now, right? That's the big focus. And I find that our office is doing things like buying off-the-shelf products such as Udemy, scheduling Franklin Covey classes. So we're purchasing a lot, right? But what are some other proactive things that LD can do to meet that huge ask? Besides asking, obviously, right?
Yeah, well, the challenge that I have with the upskilling, reskilling conversation is, at least at this stage, it is a bit more of a reactive conversation for L&D than it is a proactive conversation. And usually I don't like I usually like to focus on what can we proactively do, but it is a little bit more of an HR conversation in terms of what is our approach to reskilling and upskilling. For me, the proactive, what can L&D professionals do is like upskilling and reskilling within keeping our own house in order. Like, what does upskilling and reskilling mean to me as an L&D professional? And with all due respect to the organizations that are doing that, giving people options of Udemy and growth options where they can explore different things and doing things is a part of the equation. But for me, and this is like just something that I look at it from my own practicality, even in the work that I do today, is the rubber hits the road more when I'm doing a performance discussion with someone. We just went through this at the end of the year, and I gave the people that I did the performance evaluation to, I had some development goals for 2023 in there. But those were my goals based on our business and our organization. What I asked them all to do is I said, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Where do you want to be going next? And let's try to put a goal in there that can help you work towards that. That to me is a little bit more of a practical upskilling, reskilling conversation of where do you want to go? What do you want to be doing next? Where do you want to grow towards? That at least applies to my own work. But I do find there's an imbalance in my mind between the amount of attention that upskilling and reskilling is getting within the L&D space and our ability to be proactive about that as compared to what we can do to support the focus that our organizations are doing upon it.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you, David.
No problem. Any other questions? I'm just looking at chat, see if anybody has anything in there. Thanks for all the comments in Unity. Any other questions, comments that anyone might have?
Well, I'll interject briefly, and if there's still questions, we can jump back in. But in the event that there are not, first of all, thank you. I think this is a really good discussion to look at what's out there. And again, especially the piece at the end of, I think there is a lot of noise. Then you got to figure out how to apply it. You know, the whole AR VR thing is really interesting. There's an article out today about Apple was going to have AR, and now it's yeah, it was going to be more of an AR. Now they're going to have a mixed reality product, and it's one of those things. Once Apple gets in, then you know it that sends to move some needles too. But you've gotten all that cool stuff at your house, so you probably have the Oculus and all the other those kind of things, and there's some neat stuff with it. But it's to your point, right? It hasn't. Some of this stuff is aspirational for a lot of us because, you know, I to your point with the virtual reality, I've seen like training for an oil rig or things like that where you know you can die and so you don't want to do you can have virtual death instead of actual death, which is a little bit safer.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so I think that's an important piece. It's good to, I find it very important to know about all this stuff so that if the application of you know happens, that then I see something, there's a place for it, then it's good. But I think that might be for me, the valuable piece of what you said tonight is, you know, is it solving your problem? And if not, is it just a toy?
Right.
And I think we get preoccupied with shiny objects too often. So good reality check on that front. But I think this is an important conversation and one that will continue to evolve, and you know, hopefully you can come back at some point in time and give us the updates.
Excellent. Thank you. I would love to.
But anyone else, last call here. All right. I am going to stop the recording if I can find that button. There we go.